Okay, so for this lesson inside of Adobe After Effects, we are going to start talking about cameras. Cameras are a lot of fun. I really like them. Creating virtual cameras inside of After Effects to move within 3D objects is kind of a lot like working with lights, as we've worked with in previous lessons, but this time we're going with cameras and see some of the cool things that cameras can do and some of the functions that cameras will work with. I have this composition that I was working with last time, which is basically these dancers in this room. They look like this. If you look at this from different perspectives, you can look at this from custom view here, and you can see that we have these dancers laid out on this platform with this floor and this back wall. We'll just relabel this back wall, and we'll relabel this floor just to have this here. Everything's labeled appropriately, etc. There's a bunch of expressions going on here with the lights. We were playing a lot last time. I don't really want all those, so I'm going to just disable them temporarily. I'm going to hit the E key twice. So E is for effects. Double E would be for expressions, and we have expressions on the point of interest of the dancers to have them move around, on the lights, etc. There's this equal sign next to all the expressions that are on there. So here's the expression, here's the equal sign. We can just disable the expressions, and we're just going to disable expressions galore, just every expression that is on here. We're just going to look through and make this a lot more boring, but, you know, we're going to get rid of the expressions. So now we've gotten rid of all the expressions, so now it just moves a little bit smoother, a little bit easier. It's just kind of there. So nothing really going on, but we do have this, you know, this whole look with this lights and everything. I'm going to go back to active camera mode. Now you see here it says active camera, and this is the thing. It'll say active camera in here, and it's showing me the active camera view. And what is the active camera view? Well, for lack of a camera, since we don't have a camera in here, it says active camera, and then it says active camera default, which means, heck, there is no camera. So we are cameraless, but it's just assuming that there's at least a field of view looking at this scene of these dancers in this location. Well, we're going to go here to the layer menu and go to layer, new camera, and the shortcut is on a Mac Command Option Shift C. So it is all three modifiers, Control Alt Shift on a PC. Hold down all your fingers there on the left side of the keyboard, Control Alt Shift or Command Option Shift C, and hit C, and we'll bring up the camera settings. And here we have the camera settings. Now there's a bunch of settings that we can mess with. There is a 2-node camera and a preset and a film size and an angle of view and a zoom level and a focal length and units and man, all it's locked to zoom and enable depth of field, and all these there's all these questions, and all these questions, it gets a little crazy. So let's work simply and work with a preset. So you'll see here there are presets based on a focal length. Right now it's set to 50, but we can switch to, say, a 20 millimeter or 24 millimeter focal length, and we'll switch this. When we switch this and we add this camera in, this will now become the active camera. So this will switch away from the default active camera and switch to this active camera. And we say OK, and boom. And you'll see automatically my view changes. My view changes to a wider shot. Now you're seeing the space is not covered by the background. We can make the background a little bit wider, make this a little bit wider as well, and have a bigger background. But you can also see that the image looks a little bit flatter because it is a wide angle shot. So it switched to this wide angle view, and you know the subjects look closer to the background. It looks wider overall. It's there. If we delete this camera, you'll see what it looked like before. Boom, this is what it looked like before. You know, this was with the camera. Boom, it looks like that. And so you have that perspective in there. Let's hit Command Option Shift C again, and we'll go to something like a longer lens. We'll go to like the 135. This is a really telephoto lens, very zoomed in, 135 millimeter focal length. We have this there. We're going to say OK, and then you're going to see it looks very zoomed in. And so you see there you have a little bit more depth between the characters in the background. This is a more zoomed in lens. So you can see that we can take this lens, and we have this lens. Again, if we delete this lens, this is what it is. Now, if you go and you make a lens and you say, hey, I just want this to look like it looks in here. When it says active camera here, and it says active camera default here, what it's assuming, what After Effects by default assumes, is that it's looking through a 50 millimeter lens. So this is your default lens. So if you don't want your perspective to change, you're like, oh, I just want to turn what I'm looking at right now into a lens, you can switch to 50 millimeter, and you can say 50 millimeter lens. We're working with a 2-node camera, and we'll talk about what that means. And we go like that, and hey, nothing changes. It's all just the same there. And so we have that perfectly as a simple idea inside of here. So let's look at the camera, and let's look at some of the camera controls. We have here within the transform controls, we now have a position control that we can move with the position of this camera, and we can move back and forth the position of the camera and change the position both horizontally, vertically, and even on the z-axis, which would rotate, or actually push in on the z-axis and move in closer or further to physically move in the camera. I'll reset this. We also have an X rotation where we can rotate this axis up or down on the X axis. So this is be to tilt the camera. We also have a Y rotation, which would allow us to pan the camera from its axis point. Imagine that the camera is on some kind of a tripod or a pedestal. And we also have a Z rotation, which is crazy because you can actually rotate this way. Very crazy. Ooh, wow, wild and wacky. But let's look at this in two views here. So we're going to go in here into two views, and we're going to see that if we go here to two views, and we can look at this from the active camera, and then over here, we're going to look at this from the top view. So we're going to look at this in top view, and we can see our scene basically broken out that way. I'm going to hide my lights for a second. So I'm going to go in here just to show you a little bit of the controls. If you ever go to the composition monitor up here, you'll see that it says these little three lines right here, this little menu right here. It says view options, and under view options, there's an option for camera wireframe on and spotlight wireframes. So the spotlight wireframes, I only want them when selected. So they're going to be here, but they're only going to be there when selected. So now we're not even looking at the lights. They're not there unless I select on one of the lights. If I select on a point light or something, or select on the key for the dancer, it's going to show up. And if I select on the back for the dancers, they're going to show up. But that's only when they're selected. So right now they're not showing up unless they're selected. So you can do that in the view options. That's there. But the camera options, the camera is here. It looks like there. Here's where the camera is. This is the camera. And then this is what it's the view of what it's showing me inside the plane here. So we have this like there. And we're going to have a move here. So much like the spotlight, a lot like the spotlight, there's some controls here for the movement that are kind of obvious. And so here we have the ability to move position. Now you'll notice that when I move position back and forth, it actually rotates this camera. And the reason why it rotates this camera is because, like the spotlight, there is a point of interest. So if I told my camera operator, hey, get a shot of this guy over here, and point my point of interest, this little guy right here is the point of interest. You can either do this by the numbers and adjust your point of interest like so. And we'll put this point of interest directly on this person here. So we're going to put it right here on this person. So we have a point of interest right there. And now it's pointed at this point of interest. And we'll look here. We'll switch over to left view for a second. We'll go from active camera to left view, just so you can see this. And I'm going to put my camera here. Here's my camera. I'm going to put my point of interest right on this person. Great. It's perfectly there. So it's perfectly on this person right here. We'll go back to active camera on this view. And it says active camera, camera 1. And we're going to put our point of interest right there on that person. So there it is, directly on that person, right there. Cool. And now when I move my position back and forth, it moves it around as though it was following this person. And this would act the way a normal camera person would act, right? So if you had a camera person and you put him on set and you said, hey, camera operator, DP, cinematographer, videographer, get a shot of this guy, and then I want you to move over here to the right. Yeah, I would hope that your camera operator, he or she, would move and turn at the same time, because they'd be following that point of interest, and they'd be moving with that point of interest and rotating along that point of interest. So that's how it should work. So let's animate this. Let's go here. We're going to take this. We're going to reset the position. Right click and reset. And I'm going to say the point of interest is there. Let's animate the point of interest to go from here and over 2 seconds, we're going to go here, and then we're going to go over to here and drag, not up, sorry. Let's drag in the z-axis over to here, to the side. And you see, based on the settings that I have, right now we're moving this way and we're going here. And the motion path, actually, this is interesting because this is normally not the way that I have this. Under Preferences General, it says default spatial interpolation is not set to linear. So this is already making curved vertex points that allow for Bezier handles. So we can actually have an arc here, which is actually nice in the case of a camera. So now this is going to arc over. It's going to take a little bit of render energy here to do this, but we can see here that we have this. Kind of make as much space as I can for this. And we see here that it's just arcing over. It's going to arc over this way and kind of wrap around this way. And we're going to see from the active camera view that we're coming around. And that's adorable. That's lovely. Again, unfortunately, these two dancers are only 2D cut out PNGs, but it will wrap around here like so. So we do have this actively there in the point of interest. Now, the thing to be careful of, and we've talked about this with the spotlight, I believe, but if I go here, and if I try to drag these by the arrows here on the points of the thing, it's going to move both, dragging physically inside the viewer. So if I'm inside the viewer and I drag physically by dragging these X position or the Z position or the Y position, if I drag these physically, it's going to move both the point of interest and the position. And the way that I think about this, when I think about this with a light, with a spotlight, when I think about this with the camera, is I think about is here, if I use the numbers down here, if I drag by the numbers and I move the numbers to move it, it's going to move basically on position and here, and it's going to move these. This is me telling the camera operator move. This is me picking up the camera operator and grabbing him by the waist, lifting him in the air, and throwing him over somewhere else. And so to physically grab here, it moves both the point of interest and position. And that's really, it comes down to basically a choice. You know, Adobe had a choice. They said, hey, what happens if you go like this on position? Does it maintain point of interest? And we go here and we go in the Z-axis and we say move here to position, and it moves there and it maintains point of interest because we have a point of interest and it follows said point of interest, right? And that would make sense. And then here, the other question was, well, what happens if we grab here? Well, I don't know. What do you want it to do? What should it do? And we say, oh, when we grab here, it moves both position and point of interest, which means now we have to update our point of interest again. Here's the problem. I used to do this wrong all the time, and I'll show you the mistake I used to make on a regular basis. I used to do this. I used to position on my point of interest and have something there, and then I'd go to animate, and I'd say, okay, like animate position, and I'd drag over to here, and then I would drag here, and I'd be like, oh, I lost my point of interest. My point of interest is gone. Okay, well, let me reset my point of interest. And I'm like, great. And then let's go to 4 seconds. And I'm going to move over to here. And I'll drag to here. And I'll drag to, I don't know, here. And I'd be like, oh, great. I'd be like, oh, my point of interest moved again. And then I'd think, oh, maybe I have to animate my point of interest, which would not work for you. So you either have to say, drag physically on the screen and keep updating your point of interest every single time, or go by the numbers. Just decide, heck, I'm going to go by the numbers, and I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way and only control point of interest. Because when I do drag up here, it's going to drag both. You're going to see both these numbers, the point of interest and the position, are going to change. But I want to keep my point of interest locked on this character. So I'm going to go here and say, yeah, let me pull by the numbers and go to here and go to here. And now my point of interest maintains. That's how the spotlight works. That's how the camera works. That is the difference between dragging in here in the screen or in here in the numbers and then dragging physically on the screen. Dragging physically on the screen is like picking this whole thing up and just saying, let's move this whole darn thing. And so we can do that. So now we're going to come here and we're going to come around there. And we're going to come around the back of this dancer here. We're going to come around to this dancer. We're going to come on. Again, I'm not going to do this by the numbers. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to say, let's go back over to here. Now, if I go too far back, I'm going to go behind the wall. And now, great, I can't see anything because I'm literally behind the wall. That doesn't work for me. So let's come back not so far. And let's come around and come down to here and come to this dancer. And now we're in this dancer. It's a little dark because of the lights. So we're hitting the lights in a weird position. We could say, let's go to the point light. Let's go to AA and bring up the point light's intensity so have a little bit brighter overall look. And we could even say, let's just turn off the lights for the dancers. Let's just go here and turn off the lights for the dancers, the back lights for the dancers, and we'll turn off the key lights for the dancers. We'll bring the point light back, and we'll say, just correct that, and we'll get rid of the key lights for the dancers. Now we just have an overall, basic point light for the dancers. Do we have any other lights here? Yeah, all right, so we have this light there. Maybe we'll play with it a little bit more in terms of lights. I'm just looking at lights that we have and what we're getting rid of and what we're keeping. So we have a little bit of shadow here. We could make another point light behind this dancer. So we could say, let's grab this. Let's duplicate this point light. Command D, duplicate this point light. And we're going to take this other point light. And we're just going to push this one back here. Push this behind the dancer so we have, oh yeah, now we can see him. Great, so now we have some lights there. So again, we're kind of dumbing down this image, but we have some, now it's really bright. It's really awkwardly bright, but we'll take it. We can even go to the dancers and say, let's hit AA and have them not affected by light. Don't accept lights. They don't get brighter. The background gets brighter, but they don't. So that's just some adjustments we can make. But right now back to the camera. Sorry, let's focus on the camera. Now it's kind of wrapping around like this. It's doing this. It's going to come around here, and then slowly but surely, as this renders, It's going to come around the dancers and going to wrap around here. But as it wraps around, again, it's coming through and it's saying, hey, let's wrap around here, and then it's going to come to here. And at this point, it's going to be on this dancer. And now it's on this dancer. Now, let's say, for example, you were going to come around and you wrapped around the camera. You know, maybe in a perfect world, we should put some more walls up here because it's really the black absence of space. But say, for example, you were going to come around here and you were going to look here. And say, for example, you were on this dancer here. So you're on dancer 1 here. And this is looking at dancer number 1 here. Dancer 1. And so we're looking at dancer 1 right here. And say we wanted to go to dancer 2. So dancer 2 is over here. We'll make both these dancers, I don't know, red or something. Yeah, make them red so you can really see them a little bit better. So there's dancer 1, there's dancer 2. We'll make them both red so you can see them. And say we want to go dancer 2. Now the question that will come up is, say we want to just have this pan over to dancer number 2 for a second. And the question will be that we have this camera coming around. Now we have options. We could go in here and we could animate the point of interest. So say it comes around, hooks in this dancer here. Hey, look at this dancer dancing. Great. And then maybe here we could say, okay, let's go to point of interest. A for anchor point is the same thing as point of interest. So we can hit there and we could say, hey, what if we moved the point of interest over to this other dancer? Now the point of interest is going to animate. It's going to be boom on this dancer. So now we just did this. It came around. It went over here and said, hey, let's look at that dancer. And that's, yeah, we could animate the point of interest. Absolutely. There's a thing we could do. We could totally animate the point of interest. We could also animate Y rotation, right? We could go to Y rotation, just say, hey, yeah, the point of interest, this is a real point of interest, but we just want to go over to the left here and just peek at this other dancer. So let's just Y rotate over to here and peek at this other dancer and use Y rotation as our animation. So again, it whips around, parks in this guy, and comes around and gets them. Boom. Does that work? Yeah. Or we could say, hey, let's animate the orientation, because let's be honest, animation orientation is pretty much the same thing as animating point of interest or animating rotation. Orientation and rotation, they're basically synonymous, except for some minor differences. But they're basically the same thing. We could animate orientation. Yeah, we could do that. Or we could move position, I guess, and get them both in there. There's several different options, and this is where it gets crazy inside of After Effects. After Effects is wonderful because it allows you to do a whole bunch of different things and work in a whole bunch of different ways, but sometimes it gets a little overwhelming because it allows you to work in a bunch of different ways, and you don't always know which one is the right one. And honestly, I don't know if I can tell you. Okay, our options. We can change point of interest. That would be like a director saying, hey, get a shot of this person, and then the director saying, move and get a shot of this person. And that's kind of an order from the director telling the camera operator what to do. Think of point of interest that way. Of I've told you to look here, and then I've told you to look over here. Rotation would be basically saying, hey, pan. And same thing with orientation, I guess. And so I don't know which one is the right one to do. I don't know which one is the one to do. Just what you should understand, and what's most important is, if you're going to pick one, do that. Like what I used to do when I was brand new is I'd move around and I'd be on here in this point, and then I'd use orientation to move over. And I'd be like, cool, I used orientation to move over. Oh, let me move back to the guy. All right, let me update point of interest. So now I'm going to animate point of interest to go not back on this guy, but back over to here so that it goes, whatever the orientation is, the couple degrees, 30 degrees off of orientation to be over here. And now my point of interest is like, I'd make a big mess for myself, and I'd be animating all these different things. If you're going to animate orientation to do your pans, animate orientation to do your pans. If you're going to animate rotation to do your pans, animate rotation to your pans. If you're going to animate point of interest to move the camera, which will inadvertently pan for you, use that. Just have one way of doing it and stick with that. Stick with whatever works for your mentality, but don't try to change up and try to solve problems by whatever numbers are in front of you or whatever property you can adjust to move it, because you're going to end up making a big mess for yourself, and it gets really confusing. Figure out the how you want to do this and stick with those proper orders of how these things work. So that's a little bit about how the camera works in its basic, most simplistic way of working and how it's there. What I'm warning you of, and the thing I want you to take away from this, is you can move cameras and cameras can move, but guess what? The problem will be it can get a little bit messy. It can get a little messy because you do have point of interest, which can move you. You do have orientation, which can pan you and tilt you. You do have rotations, which can pan and tilt, etc. And so you do have all these ways of doing it. So these ways, again, rotation kind of almost basically ignores point of interest. So when you're here and you rotate, you say, hey, I am 40 degrees off, minus 40 degrees off. I'm 40 degrees off of my orientation, of my point of interest here. So my point of interest is here, pointed right here, but I'm 4 degrees off it. So it's still acknowledging that point of interest exists, but rotation doesn't care. Rotation just says, hey, I'm going to twist my body away from where the point of interest is. As opposed to position, which position will acknowledge point of interest and say, hey, when I move, as I move, I'm going to rotate following the point of interest. So it tries to kind of emulate what a camera would do naturally, what a camera should do, and how a camera should work in a normal circumstance. And it is going to follow along those kind of things. So whatever kind of move you're making, just consider all those variables. Cameras get really exciting. They're a lot of fun to do, but they can start to get really complicated. So let's complicate them some more. All right, so let's take a look at what we got here in terms of controls. There are some other ways to control the camera. We're going to turn off this position, and we'll leave point of interest. Actually, we're just going to reset everything. We're going to open up all the transform properties and go here to reset. Okay, so now we're here inside this view, and we have this set up like so. Great. We're going to look at some controls here. Up top here, you have some controls. These three controls: orbit around cursor, pan under cursor, and dolly towards cursor, which is basically your orbit, your transform control, and your zoom control, or your physically dollying control, because we're going to physically move the camera. So it's not necessarily a zoom, it's more of a dolly, I should speak accurately. If you hit the C key, you'll notice the C key goes to this orbit tool. And if you hit the C key again, it goes to this transform tool, or this move tool. And then if you go to the C key again, hit C again, so you can go between all these tools back and forth by going here. So let's take a look. If I hit the C key, I can now go here and I can move and I can orbit around like this. Notice that this is moving both position and point of interest. So this is if I'm too lazy to make my move and I just want to move my camera around and get a different perspective, I can just move this way and hold in the C and just change my perspective into a different location like so. I can hit the C again, and I can physically move this camera left or right. Again, this is moving both these numbers, position and point of interest. This is a hard thing. If you want to turn on the stopwatch for position and point of interest, you can just animate this way. But wherever it lands is where it lands. I hit the C again. I can now zoom in and zoom in here like so. And so I have those controls to orbit, to move, and to zoom in or zoom out. And I can move those controls that way. There's some other things I can do. If I'm here and I hold down the Option key, this creates what's called a unified camera tool. This is one tool. This is a lot of the ways that 3D modelers work. They don't often have the option to hold in the Option key, and then it's this way. Okay, if it's this way and I hit the left mouse button, I get an orbit tool. So this will orbit me with the left mouse button. I don't have to hit the C key. I hit the C key once, and I hold in the Option key. Now, holding the Option, now that I'm in camera mode, the Option gives me this camera-looking icon, and then here with this camera-looking icon, left mouse will orbit. Hit the right mouse button, that will zoom me in and zoom me out. And then the middle mouse button. Now you're going to say, but Chad, I don't have a middle mouse button. Okay, you have a scroll wheel. So you know that if you hold your scroll wheel, you can scroll back and forth and zoom in and zoom out the comp, right? But if you push down your scroll wheel while holding the Option key, you get the track left and right tool. So you can get the ability to track left and right or up and down, and you can physically move that way. So if you want to use the Option key with just one of these camera modes selected, you can go to the unified camera, which will do all three. But wait, what are you going to tell me now, Chad? There's a third way of doing this? You're going to say there's an actual third way of moving the camera around? Yes. Since the inclusion of Cinema 4D and the partnership between Cinema 4D and After Effects, we started to get this other idea of using 1, 2, and 3. And so 1, 2, and 3 in After Effects. If I'm in selection, if I hold down 1, I get the orbit tool. Notice as I let go of camera 1, it goes to here. Hold down the number 1, it goes to the orbit tool, and I get the orbit tool. So I get 1, I get the orbit tool. Lovely. I hold down 2, I get the track. let go, I go back to there. Hold down 3, I get the zoom. So I really like these in that I can switch between these tools, between 1, 2, and 3, and go back and forth. And still, if I just hold them down, I can stay in selection. So I hold down 1, I orbit, I hold down 2, I track, I hold down 3, I zoom, and I can go like there. Now again, those are moving both position and the point of interest control, so that gets a little bit crazy. Things you want to be careful of. But since I work with Cinema 4D a lot, I'd really like this method of doing these moves here. Stay in selection and just 3, 1, 2, or 2, 1, etc. And I can just move back and forth. So if you get used to that, that is pretty awesome and a pretty wonderful way to work through camera movements in a simple idea. Okay, now say for example, you hate the point of interest. The point of interest is a pain in the butt. And here's the truth. The point of interest is wonderfully, wonderfully useful. Here's why it's wonderfully useful. Because it allows you the ability to lock onto a target, right? If you had a camera operator, if you were in a situation where you had a camera operator and you said to the camera operator, hey, get a shot of this guy. Point this camera and say, get a shot of this guy. And you got a shot of this guy and you went here into, see now we're in weird view here. We're going to go into left view and make sure that we're on this guy right here, and we're right here in this guy. If you said, hey, have a point of interest, and the point of interest is great, and have this locked into this guy, you would say, get a shot of this guy and move over here. And if the camera, honestly, if you were on a set, if you were on a film set, and a camera operator said, get a shot of this guy, and you went, cool. And then you said, hey, move over here, camera person. And the camera person went like this and went like that. You'd be like, what are you doing? I said, get a shot of the guy. And the camera operator would be like, but then you told me to move over there. And so I just did. And like, but you didn't keep your shot of this guy? And he's like, no, I'm not that smart. I'm not. I just do what you tell me, boss. You would probably fire that camera operator, right? You want a point of interest because you want to be able to tell the camera operator, hey, move over here, but keep a shot of the guy, which is what I said in the first place. So you have that ability to control what I said in the first place and retain that knowledge and use that normally, which would absolutely, absolutely make sense. However, in doing this, the point of interest becomes problematic because if you rotate, all of a sudden you've lost the point of interest. Now you're like, oh man, what is the point of interest? It's minus 21 degrees off of the point of interest. And now when I change the point of interest, it's always going to be minus 21. And it gets confusing and it gets difficult. I often compare the point of interest to like a pet, right? You have a pet dog, you put your dog on a leash. You tell your dog on a leash. Why do you put your dog on a leash? I don't know. Maybe the dog doesn't want to be on a leash, but you're going to take your dog for a walk in the park. You don't want your dog running off. So you make sure that your dog is tied to you. And this is you right here doing the one-arm handstand. Amazing. And so this is you. And so when you move, the dog follows along and as you move position, he's just locked to you and he's staying with you. But maybe sometimes your dog becomes well trained enough that you say, hey, I just want the freedom. I just want the freedom to let my dog run around. He'll come back. He's a good dog. He'll move with me and he'll stay with me. And so I want to get rid of the leash. I want to just tell my dog to get rid of the leash. Well, now you have to call your dog every time you want your dog to come back because your dog's going to just wander off, which is fine. But maybe you want to do that. And there are some circumstances. There are some circumstances where I will just let my dog wander off. Or in this case, forget the point of interest. So I'm going to click on the camera. And I'm going to right-click on the camera. And I'm going to Camera, Transform, Auto-Orient. That is Command-Alt-O is the shortcut. I'll never remember that, but I'm just going to tell you in case you remember it. Command-Alt-O is Auto-Orient. And you'll see that up here it says Orient. It says Auto-Orientation, and it says Orient towards point of interest. And that's on. Well, guess what? You can turn that off. Yeah, just get rid of it. Auto-orient towards point of interest. Guess what? Point of interest is gone. And now you no longer have a point of interest. So now here, you no longer have a point of interest, which means if you want your camera to move from here to here, it will move from here to here. It'll move from there to there. It'll move from there to there. Whoops. Sorry, I reset my camera and I turned point of interest back on. Sorry, good thing I remember that shortcut, Command-Alt-O. Thank you. Let's turn on auto-orient towards point of interest off. Great, it looks like there. Now we're going to do this again, sorry. Position, I was wondering why I was doing that. If I move my position here, it goes like there, and it goes to there, and it goes to there. And it goes, hey, but you didn't rotate. Well, you didn't tell me to rotate, boss. Now I have the dumbest camera operator in the world. But sometimes, maybe I just want to be in control, and I want to tell the camera operator, no, for real, rotate when you do this. And so I'm going to animate you to rotate every single time. Is that dumber? Sure it is. But is it More control? Yeah, but you have to decide you have to do everything. So the point of interest is in your friend, but honestly, when I first got into After Effects camera work, I started messing with the camera and I started messing with the point of interest, and I'd start rotating and orienting and changing the point of interest, and I'd get myself into I'd trip over myself, basically. That's basically what I did. I would trip over myself because I'd be trying to animate all three, and it was a mess. And I figured out you could turn off point of interest, and guess what? All of a sudden, things became easier. Things just became easier because I wasn't dealing with a point of interest, and I didn't have to worry about a point of interest. And until I kind of wrapped my brain around how point of interest worked and got more comfortable with it, it was just easy to turn it off. That said, if you go here to Command-Alt-Shift-C and you make a camera, and you can make more than one camera. You can actually have two cameras and then have one stop and one start. You could trim one back and it would switch between cameras. But here in the camera settings, if you go to one node camera, the one node camera, 50 millimeter here, the one node camera, we'll even switch to 20 millimeter. The one node camera is a camera without a point of interest. The other node is the point of interest. So now you have camera, point of interest, those are your two nodes. A one node camera doesn't have a point of interest. So this is your other camera. Now this is the active camera. So we could do this, theoretically. We could take this and say, hey, this camera doesn't have a point of interest. We can move this camera over here. Or we can move this camera over here and then rotate this camera or orient this camera this way. We'll move position again. We'll move it further over. And we'll move orientation so it's here. And then you could literally have one camera start and one camera stop because different cameras can be active. Option bracket. Whoops, sorry. Other track. Option bracket. Boom. And have this camera here versus this camera, and it can switch between cameras. So this would be cutting your cameras or switching your cameras like you're in a studio. So you could actually move back and forth between which camera is active. The camera on top is the one that's active here. And so we have this scene, cut to that one. And you could have multiple cameras back and forth and do some cutting like there. But that said, simply enough, Command-Alt-Shift-C, that one node camera is, you don't have to go here and go to auto orient, transform, auto orient towards point of interest, because there is no point of interest on a one node camera. It's just built with that one. So you have those controls there and those options there. I'm going to delete camera 2 because I don't really want it. We're going to stick here with camera 1. Put this camera 1 in here, and so we have this laid out like there, and so we have this camera existing in this space. Now, there's another option. So we talked about either animating point of interest, not having point of interest. Here's another option, and this option is a trick. This is really more so a trick as an idea. We're going to go back to one view here. We're going to switch to one view in active camera. And I'm going to be here in active camera. And I'm going to say in this scene, and this is the trick that I saw people do years after I was working with cameras and After Effects. I just found this, and someone was doing this and was like, what? What are you talking about? This is crazy. And I don't know, it just makes sense. We're going to create a layer, new, null object. That is Command-Alt-Shift-Y. And so here we're going to make a null object. And if we've never talked about null object before, what is a null object? It's a solid with the opacity turned all the way down. It's nothing. It's just basically a 0% opacity solid. It's invisible nothing. If you play this, it doesn't play, but there is an icon for it that you can grab and drag. We're going to take this null, take this simple null, and we're going to make this 3D. So we're going to go in here in this null, and we're going to make this 3D. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to turn off the stopwatch for the camera, and we're going to take this null here that's going to be 3D, and simply enough, all we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, parent the camera to the null. So we're going to pick whip this and say parent the camera to the null. Now the camera's parent is the null. Now the camera doesn't care what it's doing. The camera can be controlled by the null. A lot of times people get into cameras and they're like, man, I don't know what to do with cameras. Cameras are weird. Cameras are scary. Cameras are overwhelming. I understand. They are. They can be scary, weird, and overwhelming. I appreciate that. So they say, you know what? I just want something else to control the camera. I don't know how to use the camera. I don't know how to adjust the camera. But you know what I can do? I can grab this thing right here, this null, and I can move this. And when I move this, it moves the camera. It keeps this in the center of all time. Oh, that's great, Chad. Cool. So I can just move the camera wherever. I can move this box wherever I want to move this, and it moves the camera. But what if I want to rotate the camera? Guess what? I can just rotate this, and it rotates the camera. Oh, but I want to tilt the camera. I can grab this and tilt, and it tilts the camera. And I'll animate this thing. I'll just animate this thing. This is the way that I think about this is this would be like if your director, if your, super hot-headed director came to the DP and just grabbed the camera with his hand by the lens and just said, hey, come here, come with me, and get this shot, and just grab, like, aggressively grab the front of the camera by the lens, just grabbed and pulled the entire camera rig over to the shot he wanted and be like, hey, no, you go over there. No, I want you to go over here. No, I want you to go over to there and whatever, and you could have those kind of controls. And no, I want you to do this. I want you to be here. I want you to tilt down here. And I want you to go over here and tilt down. And this one little kind of widget in the center here seems like a much more manageable control for people to work with. And even in any of the views, even if you're here in 2 views and you have a top view here or whatever it may be, they can just grab this widget and be like, oh, I just want to move this so it tilts this way. And they can see that it controls basically the view that the camera takes and how the camera moves, and you can kind of control that. And so you basically have this in this scene. You can be like, oh, I just want to pull this and tilt it from the front of the camera. And this is basically tilting it from the front of the camera. You're basically grabbing the front of the camera and tilting it whichever direction you want it to go in. And so that's a trick. So if you don't want to use point of interest, or you do want to use point of interest, whatever, you can go in and say, hey, let's just work with what I got here, and let's just work with a null. And they'll parent it to, call this null camera boss, or camera mover, whatever you want to call it. And now this thing controls, hey, I want to push in, I just grab this and pull this. I want to rotate, I just grab it and pull this. And I can just kind of manipulate it by the front, not by the back of where the camera is facing the lens, and you don't get that kind of thing. You just get a front pull control. Do it there. It's another way of working. It's another idea, another concept of a way of working. All right, let's make another comp here. I'm going to go to Command-N. We're going to make a new thing here. We'll make a new composition. 1920 by 1080, cool. And I'm just going to grab in this brick wall. And so we're going to grab in this brick wall, have this here like so. What's that? Oh, that's garbage. And we're going to make this brick wall. And I'm going to take this brick wall, and I'm going to make it 3D. And I'm going to rotate it this way. I'm going to hold down Shift, because when I hold down Shift and I rotate or orient, it snaps to 45 degrees. And so this is a 90 degree here. We're going to take this guy, we're going to put it over here like this. Bam. We're going to duplicate this, Command-D. So we're going to hit Command-D and duplicate this, and make another wall like this, and drag it over here like there. So now we have 2 walls. Great. I just want to do this for effect. And so here, I'm going to take another wall. We're going to hit Command-D. I'll drag it back out to the middle like this. Right, so it's right here in the center. And I'm going to hit this, and I'm going to rotate this way. Except I'm going to hold down Shift when I rotate, and I'm going to go 45, 90. Amazing. I'm going to pull this down here like this, and pull that right down to about there. Right, so it meets. And we'll duplicate it one more time, Command-D, and we'll duplicate it one more time, and now I have this tunnel. So this crazy looking tunnel looks great. I'm going to grab all these tunnel walls, and we're actually going to just take these on the Z-axis. I'm going to hit P for position, and the Z-axis, I'm just going to move this down in space like this, just like there. Awesome. I'm going to grab one of these edges, and just pull this open, and have a really long tunnel. Really long tunnel. Maybe we'll even go further down. We'll make a super long tunnel. And then, oh, look at this amazingly long tunnel. Look at this amazingly long tunnel. Oh, it's so scary. Cool. Now I have this super long tunnel. I'm going to go to 2 views just so you can see how this looks, how cool this is. So we now have this super long tunnel that's like that long. Great. So just to see this in here, super long tunnel. Looks amazing. We're going to actually accentuate this. I'm going to hit Command-Alt-Shift-L for new light. We'll make a point light, just a point light. And I'm just going to have a point light be, just so you can see some real appreciation of depth here. So we have a light. We'll take this light in the Z-axis. We'll put this right about here. And we're going to duplicate this light one more time. Command-D, duplicate this light, and take the duplicate on the Z-axis, and we'll push it down here. Now you can, oh yeah, that looks really, really scary tunnely. Yeah, and we have this whole scary tunnel look here like so. Great, amazing. I really like the way this tunnel looks. It's really cool. We'll put, for amusement's sake, we'll put the dancer here. Maybe we'll put a dancer. We'll take one of these dancers, take dancer 2 here. We'll put dancer 2 in the scene. And we'll make dancer 2 3D, and we'll push dancer 2 back. Now she's in front of the light, which means we need to push her on the Z-axis way back. We'll put it right about here. And we'll put her basically about there. Cool. We'll make her a little bit smaller. We'll scale her down just a little bit, maybe to like 70%. And I'm going to put her just so she's just right, not intersecting with the floor, but just right before she intersects with the floor. We'll just put her right about there, just so she's there. Maybe we'll make her 80%, a little bit bigger. Great. And I'm going to push her over here. Like so. This is going to be weird. This is going to be a weird idea. And so I'm going to take this. We could pick the answer number 2, but just for amusement's sake, I have this giraffe. Do I have the giraffe? Maybe I don't have a giraffe. Oh, there he is. Giraffe. We'll take giraffe here. We'll put dancer giraffe. We'll put the giraffe in here, and we're going to take the giraffe. We're going to push him way far in the distance, way back here. So there's a giraffe in the scene. Okay, that's weird, but there's a giraffe in the scene. Great. We'll even put the giraffe way after this light, after the second light. We'll put you way off in here and put you way far away. And we'll go here and take this giraffe. Maybe we'll take this other dancer. We'll move this dancer over here like so we can see both the dancer and the giraffe kind of in the scene. Great. We'll take the giraffe. We'll hit AA for material options, and we'll turn off accept light because I don't want the giraffe to get any brighter. I don't want to be able to see the giraffe. So now we have this giraffe. We have this here. We're going to hit Command Alt Shift C, and we're going to make a new camera. We're going to make a 50mm camera, and we'll make a 50mm camera. Great. We'll make a 2-node camera. And now here's my problem. Here's the thing, sometimes, not my problem, but sometimes the thing that bothers me is that with this camera here, with this 2-node camera, what happens is if I try to push through this scene, right? If I try to take this and I said, hey, let's push through the scene, I could push through the scene, but it's going to hit a point where it hits the point of interest. So the point of interest is right here. For example, the point of interest is right here. It'll push through the point of interest, and it'll push to the point of interest, and as it pushes to the point of interest, it'll actually flip around, which is not what I wanted. Not good at all. And that, I mean, maybe I did want that, but that's sometimes a bother. So when I'm doing these, sometimes when I'm doing these really long pushes, I'll just, what's my shortcut? Command Alt O. Turn off auto orient along point of interest. And so now I can just push forward, and I never have to worry about point of interest as a thing ever. I never have to worry about point of interest. And so that's sometimes cool. Here's my other problem with this scene. The scene is cool. It's a really cool looking scene. It has a whole, nighttime tunnel giraffe dance party. I don't know. It's very exciting. It's very amazing. It's stupid. But it's, it is what it is. But that said, I keep popping here, sorry. That said, inside of here, the problem that I have, I should say words with P, the problem that I have here is that everything's in focus. Everything is wonderfully, wonderfully in focus, and it looks amazing. It does. It looks absolutely amazing, but I don't want it to be amazing. I don't want it to be in focus. I want to have some issues with this camera. And I want to have depth of field issues. And if you're familiar with camera operation, you might be familiar with depth of field. And that's where certain things are in focus, certain things are out of focus. So I'm going to hit AA for camera options. Again, just like AA is material options and AA is light options, AA, guess what, is also camera options. So here I have your zoom control, depth of field on off, and your focus distance and your aperture controls, which is measured in pixels, which is a weird way to measure aperture. I don't really love it, but it is what it is. We're going to turn depth of field on. When I turn depth of field on, because these two objects are in different fields, you might see that certain things will get blurrier than other things. So we're going to turn depth of field on. And you saw that the giraffe gets a little bit blurrier. You'll see in really close detail if I turn this on. A little bit blurry of a giraffe. So we have a little bit of depth of field. So this is outside the field. This is a little bit blurry. This is inside the field. This is less blurry. It's there. One thing that will affect this is how far we are zoomed in. Right now we are zoomed in about it says 2666.7, almost 2 2/3 of pixels. Basically a 39.6 height. It's a standard 50mm lens. If we change the zoom, if we zoom in more, so if we have this zoomed in more. We can zoom this lens in, and when we zoom this lens in a little bit more, we will see a change in our depth of field. So we will see now the depth of field is on. As we zoom in more, which will zoom in the image, now you see this lens a little bit longer, you will see more potential blurriness. So it does get more blurry as an idea. So that is something that we can do. But the real control here is to control the aperture. So right here we control the aperture, and if we increase the aperture from 25.3 to something more, if we increase this to like 100, you're going to see a lot more depth of field. When we turn this on, it looks even blurrier. Okay, that's heavy duty depth of field. So let's go back to like 60, and we have this at 60. Okay, so now we definitely have some blurriness here. We can definitely see and appreciate some blurriness. Now over here you'll see two lines, and these two lines are your zoom length. So you do have your zoom length, how far we're zoomed in. And then you have this line right here. And this line right here is your focus distance. And this is, hey, the thing that's in focus at this distance. So now we say, hey, we're going to move this focus distance over to even with her. So she's right here. She's here. This line is perfectly, almost perfect. right there, perfectly in line with her, and so she's in focus. Now, if we crank up the aperture again, or if we even zoom in, crank up the aperture to something like 100, you're going to see that the giraffe is way out of focus. Again, between zoom and aperture, the giraffe is way out of focus, and she's always perfectly in focus. And as long as we are this far away from her, as long as we have this 4126.7 distance away from her in here, she'll be in focus and the giraffe will be out of focus. But if we turn the depth of field off, guess what? Everybody's in focus. It's a magical camera where everybody gets to be in focus. The greatest deep focus camera lens you ever saw. But now what we could do is we could animate our focus distance. We could say here at 1 second, let's animate our focus distance and go and move our focus distance to the giraffe. We're just going to take this and move over to here and get the giraffe in focus. And now my focus is the giraffe. Guess what we just did? We just did a rack focus. We just did that, racking the focus to pull our attention from one subject to another. And now she becomes blurry. We'll crank the aperture up even more. This is really your control for cranking this up and seeing what's in focus, what's out of focus. Now we're shifting this focus so that the giraffe is in focus and she's out. So right here, now that this is kind of rendered out a little bit, we can see how this looks. It'll focus, pull from one thing being in focus. So she's in focus, giraffe's out, and then giraffe's in focus, she's out. And we could rack the focus, kind of like a very dramatic, suspense thriller. Ta-da! Cool sound effect. Anyway, thing you can do, you could rack the focus from one subject to the other and have one thing be in focus and one thing be not. The other thing we can do is we could say, hey, if we move this camera, right, if we go here and we say adjust the position of this camera, as long as this is the thing that's in focus, or this distance is in focus, and let's take this dancer, for example, and let's take this dancer, we're going to move this dancer back a little bit further, just so we can really appreciate how this looks. We're going to go here, move this dancer focus. So now the dancer's back out of the focus area here because the depth of field is really shallow because the aperture is really high. If you understand about how cameras work and you understand about these controls, we're going to go back to the camera and go to the focus distance and move the focus distance right there so it's on her. So we're going to take this and put this right on her. So she's in focus. The giraffe is out. We're going to crank up the aperture. Maybe we'll zoom in a little bit more. Accentuate this. So now we zoomed in a whole bunch. And we're going to crank up the aperture up to something ungodlike. 300. Man, that's going to be crazy. So now the giraffe is soft. She's in focus. Notice how the background is even soft and the foreground is even soft. So right here in this small little range, we have a really small depth of field, really small area that's in focus, while the rest of this is crazy out of focus. It's a mess, but it's kind of cool. So we have this inside of here, like so. Now what we're going to do is we're going to push in. We're going to take position controls, and we're going to physically move, maybe over 5 seconds. We'll slowly start to push in. You're going to see that this line will move because we're moving the camera closer, and we have this focused so that she's in focus. But if we move the camera and we push in to here, she's going to go out of focus, and this line is eventually going to go to the giraffe, and the giraffe will be in focus because we'll be, however 7,000 pixels away from him. So now we have this kind of move, and this is a more realistic, replicated kind of camera that moves here, and as it adjusts, we adjust like so. Now this is going to take a little bit of time to render because particularly things like blur and motion blur and any kind of blur, depth of field being one of those kinds of blur, will affect your focus. But now we have this really cool look there. So there's some cool things you can do with the camera, and there's some cool tricks and some ideas you can do to play with the camera. Some fun you can have to really control cameras. And so just some of the nice ideas. Now within the camera options, there's a control that says iris shape, iris rotation, iris roundness, iris aspect ratio, iris diffraction fringe, highlight gain, highlight threshold, highlight saturation. These are all ways that it affects the blur that's going to happen when depth of field is on. And so if you're a real big deal camera nerd, you will understand that the different shape of the iris that is inside of your lens in an actual physical camera will affect the blur. For most people, for myself, I don't worry about this too much. I don't lose too much sleep over this. It seems like a lot. It seems like a real lot to get really focused on how this thing works and what it does. But if you ever saw the blur here, you could switch between, say, a fast rectangle to a pentagon iris, and then you'd have a different looking blur. Oh, look, I like that blur better. Or maybe a nonagon blur, and you'd see, oh, different kind of, different kind of look at the blur there. And you can change the iris roundness and really get some different looking blur based on the iris roundness of how the blur, the bokeh or whatever it may be. You can get some different kind of blur of how these highlights blur out, etc. If that's something you really want to lose sleep over, feel free to do that, and you can animate all that. God help you. Some really playful ideas that you could really do. I don't really worry about it too much, but that is some of the basics of how cameras can work. In future lessons, we can look at some things about playing with different cameras. We'll use cameras in different aspects to do things with, shape layers or with effects or with, tracking or something else like that. There's some other games we can play where we can use cameras, but those are some of the fundamentals of how cameras work. Again, you can manipulate cameras by either parenting them to a null, you can use the numbers, you can drag them on the screen, or you can even use the C key and go, or the 1, 2, and 3, or the Alt-click keys to go through all these camera options and use the universal camera tools. But play with cameras. It makes things more dynamic, more exciting. It's a lot of fun. You can make some cool looking animations where things move across the screen and everything that's there. Again, all of your 3D layers can move across inside this 3D-esque world and have some real trickery with cameras. All right, that's all we're going to do for today. So hopefully you got some fun with some cameras, and keep playing, keep making stuff, and see what you can come up with.